Three defenseless German shepherd puppies were tethered to a tree by an elderly man, and when a soldier did the unimaginable, they were abandoned in the blazing heat to perish. The German shepherd puppies were almost old enough to walk, without food, water, or hope. This story will restore your faith in second chances, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond between a warrior and the voiceless souls he chose to save. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications that help us bring more inspirational stories like this one, straight to your heart. It was the kind of heat that stole your breath, the dry, merciless blaze of late summer in a small rural town outside El Paso, Texas, that cracked the earth and sent even the wild birds into hiding. However, for the three tiny German shepherd puppies tied to a mesquite tree on the edge of an overgrown lot, there was nowhere to hide because they were only 6 weeks old, and their paws were too big for their fragile legs. Their ears are still not completely upright. The ropes dug into their necks as they twisted, confused, hungry, and desperate for the mother who had disappeared hours ago. The man who left them had not spoken, and the old neighbor across the street watched from behind a curtain, shaking her head in silent disbelief. The oldest, a dark-coated pup with curious eyes, let out a small yelp, not from one but from panic, and his siblings, one sandy brown and the other with a white patch on her chest, whimpered in response. She had called the local animal control, but no one picked up, and she secretly didn't think anyone would arrive in time, not in a place like this. Not for three unwanted dogs, but someone else was coming staff. She had witnessed the man pull up in his rusty pickup, get out without hurry, tie the three puppies to the tree with a piece of old rope, wipe his sweat off his brow, look around, and then get back in the truck and drive away. After 8 years, in the Army and 2 deployments abroad, Sergeant Daniel Reyes had returned to his late father's estate to settle the estate, and perhaps even figure out what life as a civilian looked like. The small town had echoes of his childhood, but everything felt different now, quieter and emptier, as if the part of him that had once belonged here had been replaced by something harder and scarred. That afternoon, Daniel was walking alone down the dirt road, his boots stirring up dust, scanning the horizon out of habit. He hadn't meant to go far, just enough to relieve the constant pressure building in his chest, but it made his ears ring. At first he thought it was just another ghost of memory, but it came again sharply real. He followed the sound across the lot past a broken fence until he saw 3 puppies tied up, panting, barely moving. "Easy," he whispered. "I'm not going to hurt you." Daniel's breath caught in his throat as he rushed forward and fell to his knees. The smell hit him first, a mixture of sweat, dirt, and something worse, dehydration fear. The brown one was curled up, eyes glazed, barely conscious. The smallest one flinched at his shadow, but the oldest, the dark-coated one, tried to stand, growling weakly. One by one, the puppies fell into his arms, their bones beneath their fur too light and too quiet, and he took a tiny knife out of his pocket to cut the ropes without waking them. He opened his canteen and poured a small trickle of water into his hand, offering it to them gently, and they drank as if they hadn't tasted anything in days. He looked around, wondering who would do this, and his fist clenched as anger rose in his chest, hot and shaking. But more than that, he felt something, deeper, something that pulled at a place inside him that he believed he'd buried with his uniform responsibility. He gathered the puppies into his arms, holding them like shattered pieces of something sacred. "You're coming with me," he murmured, saying, "I've seen too much to walk away from this." Daniel wasn't aware of it yet, but the tiniest puppy raised her head a little and rested her chin on his wrist. This wasn't just a rescue. It was the start of their and his recovery. The Army had trained Daniel to handle explosives, navigate hostile terrain, and survive under fire, but not how to care for 3 trembling, malnourished puppies who looked up to him as if he were their last hope. Daniel had no plan and had never raised puppies before. He took them into his father's old garage, which still smelled of motor oil, sawdust, and fading memories. He cleared out a corner, laid down 2 old sleeping bags, and gently placed the pups inside. They were so light, too light, the smallest one. The one with the white patch on her chest was barely responsive. She whimpered every time Daniel moved, as if expecting pain. He knelt beside her, opening a can of wet dog food he'd picked up on the way back from town. "I don't even know your names," he whispered. He dipped his fingers into the food and brought it to the smallest pup's mouth. At first, she flinched. Then slowly, her tongue brushed against his fingers. Her tiny jaw worked weakly. Chewing, the other two followed the brown one eating, hungrily, and the dark-coated one never breaking eye contact with Daniel. Even as he swallowed each bite, Daniel sat back against the wall and exhaled deeply. He hadn't realized how tense his own body had been. It was like something inside him had locked up ever since he got home, since the funeral, since the silence. He looked down at the 3 pups curled together in the blanket, now their bellies rising and falling with slow, unsteady breaths. There was something fragile about it. Something honest. Later that night, the smallest one began to cry, a thin, broken whimper that echoed through the garage and straight into Daniel's chest. He sat up instantly, heart pounding like it used to during night patrols. He moved toward them instinctively, checking them for signs of pain, injury, distress. She was shivering. He picked her up gently, wrapping her in the corner of his hoodie and holding her against his chest. "It's okay," he murmured. "You're safe now. I promise." She quieted, and for the first time in months, so did his thoughts. Daniel had not intended to keep them. Instead, he had thought that once they were healthy enough, he would call a rescue group, or perhaps someone from the base who knew about working dogs. These weren't just any dogs, though, because he could tell by the way they moved that their bloodlines were strong. The following morning, Daniel woke up stiff and still sitting against the wall, with the tiny white-patched pup sleeping in the crook of his arm, and the other 2 curled at his feet. He blinked against the sunlight coming in through the broken garage window. When Daniel brought the puppies inside later that afternoon, he couldn't understand why someone had spent so much money on German shepherds, probably from a litter intended for police or military work, and then thrown them away. The house had been empty since his father had passed dust-covered furniture, old coffee cups still on the counter, unopened mail piled high, and it hadn't really been a home since Daniel's mother passed away years ago. His father had become cold and hard, just like Daniel over time. But as the pups explored the living room, tripped over their own paws, sniffed the table's legs, and barked softly at their reflections in the fireplace, when the brown one ran full speed into a laundry basket and flipped over, the dark-coated one barked in protest and came to sit next to Daniel's tail. Your sensual, wagging eyes were sharp and full of something that felt uncannily familiar. Focus, loyalty. Glass started to shift. They brought warmth, noise, and life. Daniel found himself laughing heartily. "You're trouble, aren't you?" Daniel asked, reaching down and petting the puppy's head. "But you've got fight. I like that." It wasn't until something filled the room that he understood how empty he was. And it wasn't just the pups who were healing him. Something buried and broken inside of him had begun to awaken a new beginning for them all. Axel watched Daniel with the patience, awareness, and quiet expectation that a soldier watches a commanding officer. 3 days had passed since Daniel brought the puppies into his father's house, and already it felt like something was changing in both him and the pups. The smallest pup, whom he had begun calling Luna because of the white crescent patch on her chest, was finally eating without hesitation. The brown one, Rusty, followed him everywhere, clumsy and loyal, and the dark one, bold and almost too intelligent, had become Axel. As the 3 puppies explored the yard that morning, Daniel sat on the porch, sipping black coffee. He had begun constructing a small enclosure out of leftover wood from the shed to protect them from coyotes. At night, he caught himself humming, something he hadn't done since before the war. Suddenly, instincts kicked in, and he tensed as the old black sedan came to a stop directly across from the driveway. The engine idled for a moment before the tinted window rolled down. A man with sharp eyes in his mid-60s leaned out, and he called out, "You Reyes." Daniel stood with his coffee mug still in hand, and the man didn't smile. "You got some dogs?" "Here, Daniel," Griggs said, tilting his head. 3 German shepherd pups bred for canine service, valuable litter." Daniel didn't respond. "Why would I have them?" Daniel stated that Griggs was silent, because I was supposed to pick them up 4 days ago from a breeder named Connor Slate. But when I got to his place, he said someone else took them. A friend said they'd gone to a better home. Daniel's mouth tightened when he saw the name Connor Slate on the letter. His father had previously dealt with breeders, but Daniel had never really paid much attention to it. Looking toward the yard, Griggs asked, "That's your dog?" Griggs mumbled, "Nice form. That one's got drive, they're just pups," when Axel appeared, waiting at the edge of the porch with his ears still pricked up. Daniel stepped forward in response. The old man knew exactly what he was doing. Daniel's voice was calm but firm. "If that old man tied those puppies to a tree and left them to die, then he is not fit to own a goldfish, let alone a canine will litter," Griggs said, narrowing his eyes. "You're not a civilian, are you?" Daniel remained silent. "I'm not looking for a fight," Griggs added. "You think that makes them yours?" Daniel stepped off the porch. "No. It makes them nobody-eyes until someone who gives a damn shows up, which I did there." Was a long silence. Then Griggs smiled, just barely. They got lucky before Daniel could respond. The man rolled up his window and drove off, kicking up dust behind him. Daniel stood there, heart pounding, not from fear, but from something else, a realization. These puppies were more than abandoned. They were worth something. And now someone knew where they were that night. Daniel sat by the window shotgun propped beside the door. The pups were asleep in their crate, peaceful, unaware. But Daniel didn't sleep. His mind raced with questions. Why would anyone want to hide them? Why leave them to die? And why did Axel the pup, with the intense stare and military focus, look at him like he understood more than a dog should? The next morning, Daniel found a file. In one of his father's locked drawers inside were documents, contracts, breeding certifications. One name came up again and again: K9 Elite Tactical Training Program, San Antonio Division, and under a picture of a German shepherd that looked exactly like Axel were the words Sire Maximus, deceased in service, Kia. Daniel stared at it suddenly. It made sense. These weren't just dogs. They were legacies by the end of the week. The pups had found their rhythm, and so had Daniel. They knew the sound. Of his boots on the floorboards, they knew when it was time for food, time for rest, and time to play. But more than that, something deeper was forming, a connection built on more than routine. It was trust. Rusty, the brown pup, was playful and clumsy, always the first to trip over his own feet. Luna, sweet and timid, would follow Daniel around like a shadow, resting her head on his lap whenever he sat still long enough. But Axel was different. Axel didn't just follow commands, he studied them. Daniel hadn't meant to start training them, not really, but old habits are hard to kill. He'd toss a tennis ball and Axel would retrieve it with perfect focus. He'd make a sharp whistle and Axel would stop, turn, and sit at attention like he'd done it 100 times before. It wasn't normal puppy behavior. Not at all. That morning, Daniel decided to test a theory in the backyard under the wide stretch of blue sky. He set up a mock course using empty barrels, trash cans, and old boxes. Nothing. Fancy just something to see how the pups would respond. Rusty got distracted by a butterfly before the second turn. Luna froze halfway through, unsure and nervous. But Axel locked onto Daniel's eyes. "Stay," Daniel said. Axel sat. Come, Axel moved, down, and the pup hit the ground flat in less than a second. Daniel stared hard through to. He kneeled beside him, placing a hand on the pup's back. "You've done this before, haven't you?" he murmured. "Or maybe it's just in your blood." Axel didn't move, didn't blink. He waited, ready, present. Daniel felt something he hadn't in years. Purpose inside. Later that day, he opened the file again. He traced the name of the Sire Maximus, a top-performing war dog who had saved 3 soldiers during an ambush in Syria, before being killed in the line of duty, and now his son was sleeping under Daniel's roof. Suddenly it all made sense: the intelligence, the discipline, the fire in Axel's eyes. These pups had been bred for service, and someone had tried to erase them. That night, Daniel couldn't sleep. He paced the hallway, mind racing. Why had Connor Slate, the breeder, let them go? Why tie them up instead of calling the program? Was he hiding something? His thoughts were interrupted by a sound outside, a thud, then another. Daniel froze. He moved to the window and saw the movement near the shed. A shadow, a figure. Someone was on the property. He didn't hesitate. He grabbed the shotgun, opened the door, and stepped onto the porch with trained silence. Moonlight lit the gravel driveway there near the tool shed. A man crouched, flashlight in hand, looking around. "Hey!" Daniel barked. The man froze, then bolted. Daniel didn't fire, but Axel did something even more shocking. The pup had run out ahead of him, barking with a deep, commanding tone. No puppy should have had. He moved faster than his siblings, faster than Daniel expected, and positioned himself between Daniel and the intruder's escape path. The man tripped in surprise, landing hard in the dirt, before scrambling back into his car and peeling away down the road. Daniel scooped up. Axel, heart pounding. "You just held a perimeter," he whispered, stunned. "You weren't scared, you were protecting." Axel licked his chin once and then rested calmly in his arms. That was the moment Daniel knew this wasn't just a pet. This was a partner. The next morning he made a decision. He wasn't giving them up. Not to a program. Not to a shelter. And definitely not to whoever wanted them dead, because they weren't just puppies anymore. They were his mission, and he wasn't going to fail them. Daniel had seen fear in war, real fear, but nothing rattled him, like the idea that someone was willing to sneak onto his property in the dead of night for puppies. Axel's bold defense the night before had only deepened. Daniel's resolve, these pups weren't just abandoned or forgotten. They were wanted, tracked, and for all the wrong reasons. At sunrise, Daniel drove into town, Axel riding quietly in the passenger seat. The pup sat tall, alert, like he belonged there, like he knew this world wasn't entirely safe, and he was ready to fight for it. Daniel pulled into the gravel lot behind the sheriff's office. Sheriff Boone had known him since he was a teenager, and hadn't changed much since, a stocky man with gray hair and a deep voice. Boone leaned back in his chair as Daniel walked in. "Well, if it ain't Staff Sergeant Reyes," Boone said, squinting at the dog. "That a new recruit?" Daniel gave a half smile. "I need a favor." Boone listened carefully as Daniel explained everything. The abandonment, the file he found in his father's desk, the visit from Griggs, and the shadow outside the shed when Daniel was finished. Boone leaned forward. "You're not wrong about the program," he said. "Mump K9 Elite Tactical. It's private, well-funded, and they don't like bad press. They've had a few incidents." "What kind of incidents?" Daniel asked. "Failed litters, temperament issues. One case, 3 pups sold off too young. One turned aggressive, bit a kid." Daniel's jaw clenched, "So they cover it up," Boone continued. "Sweep the pups under the rug, or the breeder does quietly. No headlines, no lawsuits. Connor Slate," Daniel said. Boone nodded. "Yeah, that name's been on reports before. Breeds for the program, pushes the dogs hard. Doesn't like questions." Daniel looked down at Axel, who was resting calmly by his boot. "He's not dangerous," he said firmly. "He's disciplined, smart, protective, and I've seen soldiers with less loyalty than him." Boone studied the pub. "He doesn't look like trouble, he's not," Daniel said. "But someone thinks he is." Boone sighed. "I can run slates. Name again, poke around, but be careful. These people don't knock on doors twice." When Daniel got home, he felt hunted, not just protective. He moved the pup's crate inside his own room and kept the shotgun loaded and within reach. That evening, while he was feeding the pups and sitting on the floor next to them, he took out the folder once more. Axel curled up against his leg, tail thumping idly. Daniel traced the bloodline chart with his finger, finding a single note at the bottom of the page, handwritten ink batch E099A. By the end of the week, Daniel's breath stuck in the rejected Litter 2 unstable destruct, which is what they were attempting to accomplish. "They were never supposed to make it," he said, his palm gripping the page tighter. "And now someone wanted to finish what the breeder started." Daniel got up and turned to face the 3 puppies. While Rusty chewed on the edge of a couch cushion, Luna slept on her back, dreaming, and Axel stared at him. waiting. You're not rejected. The morning started like any other. The pups were getting stronger. Rusty had put on weight. Luna's tail wagged with more confidence. And Daniel said softly, "You're fighters." He went to the closet and took out a duffel bag made of army green heavy canvas, which he hadn't touched since coming home. Inside was everything he'd left behind, including training gloves, utility, gear, a whistle, and a purpose. He wasn't just going to protect them, he was going to train them, make them strong, and make them visible, because if someone wanted to erase them, they would have to go through him first. Axel, who was always on guard, had started reacting to Daniel's voice as if he had been bred to do so. Daniel had constructed a modest obstacle course on the property behind the home, complete with tire tunnels, scrap wood jumping bars, and a makeshift scent station using tuna cans and old gloves. It wasn't just instinct. There was something deeper, as if Axel had picked him rather than the other way around. What had begun as a simple curiosity had evolved into routine. Axel was perfecting his posture and timing, and his eyes were fixed on Daniel's every command with the same discipline Daniel had once instilled in soldiers. After a perfect run, Axel's tail gave a single triumphant thump inside the house. Daniel said, "Good boy," and then he looked at the folder once more. He was still looking at the page when Luna started to bark short, high-pitched barks that weren't playful or excited warnings, even though Batch 09 and A had been rejected because of instability. There had been no instability, no aggression, and nothing that justified what those pups had gone through. Daniel leaped to his feet and went to the window. He took his shotgun and stepped onto the porch after a black SUV turned into the dusty lane that led to the house. It was neither a quick or slow approach. The SUV halted 20 yards distant, the engine idled, and the door opened. But it wasn't. Griggs. Axel was in the low ear alert position, following closely behind. Daniel called, "Can I help you?" A younger man wearing a lean, crisp suit and sunglasses got out. He stood next to the car, hands in his pockets, eyes concealed behind the dark lenses, and didn't smile or call out. "Mr. Reyes," the man cocked his head. Daniel didn't flinch, "But I suspect you have something that doesn't belong to you. You're in the wrong house, man," retorted. "I'm here to get the 3 German Shepherds of the K9 Elite Tactical Training Program that you are in possession of." "You mean the feces that someone tied to a tree and left to die?" "They were supposed to be removed," Daniel remarked icily. Calmly, the man stated that our director had taken the decision and that you shouldn't have gotten involved. "You attempted to kill them, but we were fixing an error." Daniel's knuckles whitened on the shotgun, although it wasn't an error on his part. When Daniel said, "Get off my land," the suited man took a slow step forward, indicating that you were a soldier. Axel stood at attention, growling low in his throat. The man nodded slightly toward the SUV, and then the back door opened, revealing another figure carrying a black case, this time for tranquilizers, not bullets, but the message was the same. They were here to take the pups alive if possible, by force if necessary. Orders are orders, and you may believe that you are protecting them, but in reality you are only postponing the inevitable. Daniel lifted the shotgun an inch and said, "I'm not putting anything off. I'm stopping it." The man paused, looked at Axel, who was already bonding with him, and muttered, "Unbelievable," before nodding to his partner. The man with the case started to move toward the house, but before Daniel fired, Axel lunged like a flash of blackened muscle, cutting the distance between them in seconds and barking so fiercely that the man froze. Bark reverberated from the hills. The leader gave Daniel one last look before getting back into the SUV. Without saying another word, the car reversed, kicked up dust, and disappeared down the road. Daniel's heart thumped as he knelt next to Axel and put both hands on the dog's face. "You chose to protect them," he whispered, "just like me." Luna and Rusty joined in smaller but equally determined groups, encircling the intruder with growls, creating a living wall between danger and home. For the first time in a long time, Daniel Reyes had something to fight for, and someone who was willing to fight with him. No more cars came, no more threats, just silence. Daniel locked every door that night, but he didn't feel alone because this wasn't just about saving puppies anymore. It was about standing up to something bigger. Daniel knew it wasn't over, so he collected all the documents, proof, and pictures and gave them to Sheriff Boone. The K-9 Elite Tactical Program was discovered, Connor Slate was arrested, justice was eventually served, and the puppies they stayed with, Rusty, were paired with a young child on the autism spectrum. The inquiry started weeks later. After Luna and Axel never left Daniel's side, they trained together, healed, and now they visit schools, veterans groups, and local shelters to remind everyone that even the rejected deserve a second chance. Luna was adopted by a retired military widow who claimed she hadn't smiled in years. Daniel saw salvation instead of a puppy as he looked at Axel.